When Mike DiNucci entered the EV charging industry nearly 2 decades ago, there were almost no EVs on the road, no established business models, and very few people who knew or even believed charging infrastructure would become a critical part of transportation like it is today. In this episode of Field Frequency, we get to hear this industry OG talk about what the market looked like before EV charging existed at scale. We talk about the mistakes the industry continues to repeat, why hardware and software are no longer enough, and why the companies that win in the next decade may be the ones that solve service, reliability, and operational execution. This conversation sheds some light on how we got here, where the industry got it right, where it got it wrong, and what comes next. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency, powered by Field Advantage, an IT field services company specializing in the maintenance and operation of critical infrastructure, and EV chargers are critical infrastructure. So let's talk about it. Today, I'm joined by Mike DiNucci, CRO for AmpUp. Mike, so glad to have you on Field Frequency.
Jason, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I was sharing this with you directly offline, but I also feel like I want to share it with the audience. Mike has been my teacher without knowing it. He's been teaching from a distance. When I first entered this industry in 2016, 2017, I was looking at YouTube videos with Mike talking about how to sell ChargePoint. So I was learning how to sell ChargePoint back then. So Mike has been a unpaid mentor and teacher without knowing it. So I'm glad that he's also continuing to contribute by
that's really humbling to hear.
Frequency. Well,
thank you so much for saying it. Yeah, when you do that, I remember recording those videos, 15 years ago now, some of them going back 18 years. And it's amazing to think that it had an effect on somebody that was entering the industry like you, had a lot of experience, but needed to learn a completely different subset of the energy sector. And
right.
It's humbling and flattering to know that I had played a small part in you kind of learning and mastering this industry.
Well, thank you. And it wasn't just me. I know you've been teaching a lot of people without knowing it. So maybe you should go out and start collecting some funds for around that. I don't know if you can do that or not.
Royalties? A good idea. Never thought about that, but you just gave me something to think about, Jason.
Well, Mike, for the audience, obviously those listening that are from the industry, they're going to know your name and know what you've done in the space. But for those that are new to the space or maybe outside the industry, I'd like you to walk us through your professional path that led you into the EV charging industry. I found that it's a very compelling story, and I think the audience will also. And then your chief revenue officer at AmpUp, I'd also like, insights on what AmpUp is doing. But let's start with your professional path into the EV charging industry.
Yeah, I took an unconventional path. When I graduated from college, got my degree, during college, my dad, who has been a Silicon Valley veteran for over 4 decades, and it's how we ended up. I live in the Silicon Valley area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and have lived here since I was 10. Because my dad was in the tech sector as either a sales leader, a C-level executive, whatever it might be. So during college, I, really didn't know what I wanted to do. So my dad sat me down and said, Mike, these days, you don't go to work for a big monolithic corporation and work there for 40 years and then retire with a gold watch. I said, you don't? He said, no. Today, you start your own thing and you grant yourself shares and you try and turn it into something big. You found something and then it takes off, and that's the career. And I said, yeah, but doing what? And he said, whatever your passion is. And I thought, okay, that helps me not even at all. So what I ended up doing, I misinterpreted his advice and I ended up opening an ice cream and coffee place in Saratoga, California, which is a bedroom community. Saratoga and Los Gatos are right next to each other. A lot of the tech CEOs live in those areas. Average, house price now is above $5 million in these places. So I thought they need a little, we'll get them a latte in the morning and we'll get them a gelato ice cream in the afternoon. So I started a place at 22 called DiNucci's and worked my fingers to the bone for 2.5 years before I realized, wait a second, I am working the counter of a coffee place. I'm running a cash, I might be the boss. My business card says owner/proprietor, but I'm working just as hard as the high school sophomores that work part-time for me a couple of hours a week. and it was not satisfying, and I wasn't good at it. And people close to me in my life said, you're ignoring the legacy that you have in your family. Your dad is one of the best salespeople of all time, and you're selling ice cream and coffee. Why don't you try getting into it? Would be like living in Hollywood and being in the dry cleaning business. Don't you want to try the core industry of this space, which is in Silicon Valley, is tech? And by the way, you've got a huge network of people through your dad that you might be able to get interviews with. And that finally led me into trying out sales for the first time when I was about 25. I gave up the little cafe, walked away from that, sold it actually, and got my first job in sales at a place called Silicon Graphics, which doesn't exist anymore, but they were very famous, SGI in the 90s. They did all the graphical workstations that rendered things like the original Toy Story or Jurassic Park or the effects in Twister. So I was selling $80,000 workstations that now would be basically useless against a pretty low-end Mac laptop. But that's the way things were at the time. And that's how I learned selling and kind of moved my way up through, the ranks of sales and got my first sales management job in the mid-2000s. And I thought things were going great until the summer of 2008, when the entire world economy collapsed. Subprime mortgages and credit default swaps and all of the shenanigans and malfeasance that were in the, rife throughout the financial world affected almost every industry. And it affected the company that I was working with at the time. I got laid off. And I remember that was a Tuesday night. Wednesday morning, I had got a call from my dad. He said, let's meet up lunch today. Sorry to hear you lost your job. It's okay. We'll figure out your next chapter. And that day he said, hey, do you want to come down the street with me? I just joined the board of advisors for this little company called Coulomb Technologies. And they have this thing called the ChargePoint network. And I said, okay, that sounds pretty cool. What do they do? He said, well, right now it's just like 6 or 7 guys in a garage. They're just engineers, but they make EV charging stations. And I said, wow, that's awesome. What does EV stand for? And he laughed at me just like you laugh, Jason, because that's a fair response. But 18 years ago, it wasn't quite as stupid of a question. And my dad said, well, it means electric vehicles, Mike. What do you think it means? And I said, I don't know. There aren't any electric vehicles in this country. You can't buy a model of electric car. He said, I know. That's because it's 2008. But sometime in the next year or so, Nissan's going to come out with this thing called the Leaf, all electric. Chevy's coming out with something called the Volt. We don't know if it's all electric or plug-in hybrid, but that's a car that's going to have a plug. Mm-hmm. And right here where we live, there's this little tiny company called Tesla that dreams that they're going to sell a luxury sedan for over $100,000 to compete with the Mercedes and BMWs and Lexuses of the world. And I was like, what? Are you serious? Wow, this could be a really big thing. Why is this happening now? And he said, well, the success of the Prius in the last 10 years. I think the first Prius came out in 98, 99, 2000, somewhere around there, maybe in 01. He said the last 5 years, car companies have woken up. They have had an epiphany that low emission or zero emission vehicles is something that the market really wants to explore. And so I found my way into this company as the first. It wasn't called ChargePoint at the time. It was called Coulomb, but eventually the second CEO changed the name to ChargePoint. But Richard Lowenthal, the original CEO, hired me as their first non-technical employee, the first person who was not an engineer at the company. And it changed my entire career.
Wow. So first non-technical person on the team. What were you going to go sell? What was the plan? I mean, you were there obviously to take and evangelize the ultimate mission of what would become ChargePoint. But what did day 1? What did day 30 look like in that role?
My gosh,
who were you talking to?
It was really like it was like shouting into a hurricane, right? Like I just felt like, or I was standing in an empty theater performing for nobody. I stayed at ChargePoint for almost 12 years as senior vice president of worldwide sales. And the joke that I make is I was selling for 12 years in a 10-year-old industry. Those first 2 years, there wasn't any selling going on. You already identified it. It was mostly about evangelizing or educating the market about this is what is coming. And at that time, there was a lot of just kind of confused looks. Wait, so electric cars are coming in like 2 years? yes, you got to get ready. Let's put some charging stations in your parking lot. And they would just say, well, why don't you call me back in 2 years if that ever happened? But the interesting thing was, Jason, there was a lot of confusion around whose problem was this going to be? Providing this infrastructure. Was it, Safeway? Or because they don't own that building, or was it the real estate trust or real estate company that owns the parking lot and the building that Safeway rents? Or is it the city, right? Isn't this like street lights, the city of San Jose or the city of Los Angeles, the city of Dallas? They're the ones that have to put in street lights. So whose problem is this infrastructure really going to be? And to have this massive of a paradigm shift in transportation, we hadn't seen anything like it for 100 years since Henry Ford. We know he didn't invent the car. He invented the assembly line. That was the last time we saw this huge of a switch in how personal and commercial transportation would change. And so there was a lot of questions. And I know that at ChargePoint, we tried to break this down very simply. Where do people park cars? Not electric cars, cars. And we came up with 4 places: where you sleep, your house, where you work, around town, which is doing errands, shopping, dining, whatever, seeing a show, and then out of town when you drive on long trips. And those things you don't go out of town. I mean, you do it a couple times a year. You drive a couple states away to see grandma for Thanksgiving, or you go and you visit your sister and her husband and kids for, Thanksgiving or whatever. And that happens a couple times a year. But where you sleep, where you work, you go there pretty much every single day. Of course, this was pre-pandemic. So you go to work every single day in an office, and around town, that's 3-4 times a week. And the length of time that you stay, the dwell time of your car being parked there, is very different. If you're on a long trip to see grandma, you're only pulling off to take a quick bio break, grab a hamburger, you're back in the car in 20 minutes. But where you sleep, you park the car when you get home at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and you don't leave for 12 hours usually. At work, you're probably there for 8 hours, right? And where you out around town, dining, doing errands, maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's 3 hours. If you're going to go see a movie or a football game or something like that, you might be gone for a couple of hours. So the modality of charging, level 2 versus level 3, do we want to do power sharing? Do we want to do V to X instead of just, G to V? All of that stuff were things that we were talking about and problems that we were trying to wrestle with at the end of the 2000s. I'm talking about 2008, 9. And it's really interesting to see that now, 18 years later, we're finally getting some answers, but we're also still wrestling with a whole set of new questions and problems that didn't even exist back then.
Yeah. I can't even imagine what it was like for you to be out there knocking on doors, making phone calls, talking to operators, regardless of who it was, where they were, gas station operators, or like you said, REITs, or, food and beverage, any of that, and trying to take a message that early to market. I entered the market. My first vertical was to take the message of EV charging to was the petroleum retailer. They were a fueling destination. They had retail. My view was you have in some cases real estate for charging. Well, right. They didn't build the store enough to supplement the electrical needs for a charger, and then they just couldn't. And everything was about ROI. They understood the ROI, and so no one was taking my calls. No one was returning my calls, and I was getting laughed at because I was talking to oil companies about electrification. Now it's funny because there's some vindication, as we've seen. Every major fuel retailer has some type of electrification program in place.
People aren't laughing anymore, are they?
No, they're not. But I sure wish they would have taken me serious back then, so maybe I could have made some more money. But
so to build on your point, Jason, a really interesting thing you said a moment ago, which is a lot of these folks were focused, or still are focused, on ROI. How much money, how much revenue can I make by monetizing this parking asset? Right. Well, back in 2008, 9, and 10, those early years, I had to try and figure out who would not care about this. And so the one industry vertical that I found tremendous success in and built huge amounts of infrastructure with was workplace. Because you've got companies around here near where I live that not only do they have free cafeterias, they've got free climbing walls, they have free massage, free dry cleaning, free childcare. offer all of these perks because they want to one up their competitors for the top tier talent, especially engineers, right? Those engineers can go wherever they want to go, or at least they could. Now I think the AI boom is changing a lot of those things. But at the time, the Apples and Netflixes and Googles and Facebooks, Metas of the world were all competing tooth and nail, and charging, believe it or not, was, hey, this is the latest, newest perk or something that we can do to make us a GPW, a great place to work. And so if we offer free charging, it's going to attract these engineers driving their Leafs or their high-end Teslas, and we'll give the charging away for free. They didn't care about ROI. And so that was the way that I kind of made my bones, or the way that I kind of got ChargePoint solidified on the map and put thousands of pins into ChargePoint's map, was selling to workplace, because they did not care about ROI.
I can see where, as an amenity value add, like you say, attention, draw in a talent, get the attention of talent and retain them, attract them, etc. Makes sense. But I could also see that back then there had to have been assumptions around how do we expand? What are the features of the hardware? There probably was some focus on the actual hardware itself, I would think, from the operators. And then, it's a different conversation than it is today. Today the conversation is utilization, uptime, in some cases survival. How do we keep
we've gone through three distinct eras, Jason, and you just identified the first and the third. The first era that we entered was the hardware. Is there a color touchscreen? Is there auto retracting cords or cable management kits? What is the it's anodized aluminum, it's a single extrusion, it's baseball bat proof, whatever it might be. We had to train our sales team to sell the differences of the hardware, right? Then we had to train them on, but hold on a second, just selling the hardware, there's not much barriers to entry there to copy who's doing it the best. Plus, it's going to commoditize things real quick, and it's going to be a race to the bottom on price. So we need to differentiate ourselves in now a different era, a second way, which was the software. What are the features of what the software allows you to do? Can you set pricing? Can you make them private so that only your employees, customers, tenants, residents can use them? Just a regular old charging station that you plug and play can't do those things. So there was this era where first we had to convince people that they needed charging, and then that it was their responsibility, that the city wasn't going to pay for it. Then we had to convince them that networked charging and giving them the flexibility and all of this choice around how they deploy, what their policies and rules for charging are going to be. They needed a networked solution in order to do that. And then finally, once we've convinced people of that, and I think we have convinced the market of that, now we've entered this third era, which is, wait a second, guys, now I have a massive amount. We have a huge footprint of charging stations installed, and one of them is always breaking, or it's offline, or somebody backs a Rivian truck into it and knocks it off of its J-bolts. So the serviceability and the uptime has now become, that is sort of the first questions, among the first questions that we get asked by customers. And usually it's the experienced customers that ask that. People that are still first-time customers, they need to familiarize themselves with those first couple things, like what are the stations made out of and what can the software let me do? But folks that are veterans and have done this and gone through this before, they come back to us and say, okay, now tell me about O&M and warranty and maintenance, and who is going to answer the phone and who is going to roll the truck when I need help.
Yeah. That is the response to deployments that became unsuccessful and maybe that's an oversimplification, but I would say that with O&M, I that's where I moved to because I saw the need for it. Started off, slinging ChargePoint hardware, and then, other brands that followed. But I saw that it was all hinging the success, not only of the brand and like you said, the operator that had been experienced began to ask about those secondary things, features, and around a hardware. Yeah, that was probably what someone that wasn't around or hadn't deployed chargers at scale would be asking. But those that already had them out there Who is answering the phone whenever I have a problem? Who's going to respond and how? How?
Correct.
You're rounding the corner 2 decades in this industry. And, some of the things that were probably an issue back then when you got started, maybe not so much on level 2, but definitely on DC, even if it was a 50 kilowatt DC charger, deployment is getting bogged down by utilities and permitting and maintenance coordination and other issues. Why does the industry, in your opinion, still struggle to operationalize charging infrastructure? Where are the drag points there?
Yeah, I think it has to do with a couple of things. One, it once again feels like, hey, we sold the product. We developed the product, the hardware and the software, or the hardware or the software. When I was at ChargePoint, we did both the hardware and the software. Now I'm at AmpUp. We just build the best software platform that we can, the best in the industry. And then you can deploy it on 140 different makes and models of hardware, your choice, everything from A to Z, dozens of different manufacturers. And like I said, 140 different models. So our specialty is we build this CMS platform that rides underneath. You could have 7 different brands of chargers, but they're all run by AmpUp. However, AmpUp is still a small company that's building software and grabbing market share quickly because we give you real-time visibility, we give you flexible access controls, smart energy and load management, detailed reporting. Basically, we say it's the EV charging management platform that runs itself. And here's the thing. Uptime, everyone always says, 99.9%, or some companies claim 100% uptime. Platform uptime is one thing. That's fine. All that means is that the panel that the charging station is connected to actually still has live power coming to it. Yeah. But at AmpUp, we measure a completely different metric, which is charging success rate. In other words, don't tell me how often the station has power. That's just an uptime number. The charging success rate, which at AmpUp is 98.5%, meaning over 98% of attempts, the driver is able to succeed with their charging session the first time that they attempt it. That's huge and it's one of the reasons why AmpUp is growing so fast, because these other hardware companies see this and they think, you know what? Drivers don't have problems, not with our hardware and not with their software. So it's like chocolate and peanut butter, 2 great tastes that taste great together. And I don't want this to be an advertisement for AmpUp. That's not why you invited me onto this show. But what I will say is then once the stations are deployed and once they're getting, 98% success rate, what about that 1% or 1.5% of the time that the station is not delivering a successful session to them? Well, we try and do as much remote diagnostics as possible, right? You try and solve the problem by power cycling the station off and on remotely, sending signals to it, trying to talk to it and find out what exactly is going on. And we have a great tool called the ClueBot that is AI based, and it tries to diagnose exactly what is wrong with the station. If it turns into, well, we can't fix this remotely, there literally needs to be a human being on site, we need to roll a truck, we partner with a separate company that can go out and do that truck roll and provide that. And even more so than that, or further than that, we also offer a complete turnkey where we will own and operate the station for you, so that if the customer the site host themselves wants nothing to do with the ongoing maintenance of the station, they just want it to work, we offer that as well, kind of what we call charging as a service, where they're paying for everything on a monthly level, the hardware, the software, the O&M, and it's all one thing, but they don't own the station itself and they don't have to worry about having somebody administer to it. So I do think that we're in this chasm right now, the whole EV industry and the EV infrastructure industry. It's a very interesting inflection point. And you and I have talked about this briefly off microphone, Jason, that we don't know which kind of direction we're kind of getting spun around inside this chasm. It's a little bit of a sandstorm, but I do think the companies that figure out how to service customers best post-install, those are the ones that are going to sort of command the next decade of EV infrastructure, the 2030s.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And to kind of go back to a point that you made about kind of that false positive, where a charger shows online because it's connected to power. Yeah, it's powered on. But if a driver pulls up and they can't transact because there's a credit card reader or because there's some kind of other issues happening, then you really sent a false signal out in terms. And if you're claiming that as uptime, then that's also that's kind of dishonest. That's
right.
dishonest in a sense. And so to claim that as a metric, and so I know you mentioned about not making this like a commercial for AmpUp, but the part of the platform of field frequency is bringing to market awareness on who's doing what and how they're doing that. And so appreciate the discretion around AmpUp, but yeah, it's good to understand that you're measuring the measuring stick is a little bit different, and it's not if it's got power. It's can you have a successful charge session when
Correct.
they plug in. Can
That's
do that.
right.
And so to that end, for the audience that's listening, would that classify AmpUp as a CPO? Because you mentioned there is a kind of a vertical integration, turnkey solution for the operators that want to give space and let AmpUp operate. But then maybe AmpUp is also like an EMSP in that they're building a platform for the CPO. Is that a fair assessment of what AmpUp is doing in the market?
We have a lot of different faces to our prism, so to speak.
Sure.
So we can do a lot of those things, but I think the vast majority of our focus is around building out our software so that it is the best suite of tools that a site host or a CPO could ever want or need when it comes to EV infrastructure. But the interesting thing, and I think this is what attracted me to AmpUp, Tom's son is the CEO and founder of the company, and we have just an absolutely outstanding C-suite. The level of talent that we have across our entire management team, and then down into, of course, the people that actually build the products, the people on my team that sell the products. It really is world class, and it's super exciting, and we're picking up momentum. And I think it's for a couple reasons. One, what really differentiates a platform today is the ability to hide the complexity. Not show it off. It used to be, oh my gosh, we do all these different things. We give you so many features, and it's overwhelming. It's like the cockpit of a jet, all these buttons. You need to hide all of that complexity into what we call a single pane of glass, because the reality is you don't design a clean standards-based system and then that's the only thing that the site host sees. What we're designing is a translation layer between the messy physical world and then a clean digital interface that makes everything very easy to read and sort of gives the site host a substrate of just a very simple dashboard where at a glance they can see what's going on. And we recognize that standards like OCPP are great and they're necessary, but they're often the lowest common denominator when it comes to what does this need to be able to do, or CTEP compliance, right? Like that, you have to adhere to that stuff, but you can't stop there. And so what we're doing at AmpUp is we avoid tightly binding our core platform to any one protocol. Instead, we built what's called an abstraction layer, which is essentially converting everything into a standard internal language, and that translates between the hardware behavior and then a normalized internal model. So we aim to be that single pane of glass that allows the site host to focus on their core business while we handle the energy. Because you know this, Jason, most EV site hosts, they don't want to become EV experts. They're not interested in that. They just want to manage their site operations. So easy to use shouldn't mean limited. It is still incredibly complex behind the scenes. The duck feet under the surface of the water are going furiously, but you don't want to let the site host or your customers see that. You wanted to make it as simple and intuitive as possible, because as this gets into we're now into hundreds of thousands of charging points across North America and millions worldwide. Those numbers are going to be millions in the US, tens or hundreds of millions of worldwide by the end of this decade. It better be pretty intuitive, the way picking up now a smartphone and being able to just figure it out by touching a very simple touchscreen graphical user interface. That's what the platforms need to be. So that's what AmpUp is not just striving to do, but actually succeeding at. And it's why I've chosen to invest my career at this point in my career here, because I really believe ChargePoint set the stage for the and I was there from 2008 until 2020. So I really believe that ChargePoint and Tesla, they laid some really excellent groundwork. Mm-hmm. But I believe that AmpUp and some of the other companies going into the future are going to be sort of the neural network or the digital brain for the charging network for the next 20 or 30 years. At least that's my hope.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's in it tracks from just an evolutionary standpoint, and that going beyond the hardware, going beyond features, like you said, the complexity of the airplane's cockpit is reduced just into that simple pane of glass. And that, I think, is really that, whether you're talking about software, that where you're talking about hardware, that where you're talking about what it means to deploy chargers, all of that, where you're talking about vehicles themselves, all of the simplicity is what's going to actually catalyze real growth, or at least take us into that place of maturity. I mean, I don't know, you're talking about, kind of companies deploying and announcements around early stage, at least definitely post or COVID, maybe in post-COVID. Companies were being rewarded for deployments and just, there was capital infusions happening. There was money coming in. Right. Now the market is forcing the operators to be successful and be sustainable and be profitable. What, right? You talking about the pivot over to AmpUp and where you're at, why you're there. What from your experience, kind of looking back to 2008 to today, what separates the companies that were building actual businesses versus those riding momentum? And I can think of so many examples of that, but I'd like to hear you. What does that look like?
Yeah. And I can think of those examples too. And I don't want to actually name
we don't want to name names. Yeah. We don't want to name names.
Yeah. Not trying to out or shame anybody, because, the bottom line is there were a lot of different, kind of buttons to press, levers to pull, or knobs to turn. And everybody out there did the best they could to try and figure out which was the right sequence, right? I do give Richard Lowenthal, who's the original CEO of ChargePoint, a lot of credit. He recognized in he recognized in the late 90s when he was mayor of Cupertino, California, which is where Apple is headquartered. He had made a lot of money in the tech industry, basically retired to raise his daughters. And then when, his daughters got too old to need, dad to coach Little League softball or go on chaperone field trips, he decided to go back to work and became mayor of Cupertino. And during that time, interestingly enough, the city-owned vehicle that they gave him was an electric RAV4. And this was probably 1997 or 98. And he fell in love with the idea of driving electric. Why should we be digging up crude oil out of the crust of the earth? We could be driving on completely clean. I know sometimes electricity is dirty to produce, but if you can produce it cleanly, then you of course burn it cleanly as a fuel. This was really something he was interested in. He filed that away, and 10 years later in 2007, founded Coulomb /ChargePoint. And he saw that the real key was that it had to be an IoT device. It had to be networked. Just having a dumb charger, and I'm not using dumb as an insult or pejorative, I'm just saying it's not networked. Sure. A plug, like you would plug your phone in at the airport on a support beam, that's not going to solve the problems of how are we going to pay for this fuel, who's going to dispense it, and then how do we talk to or work with the utilities that produce the electricity, right? Those were some key early questions that had to be answered. A lot of folks tried different things. There were, I'm sure you heard the stories of the companies that originally said, we're going to do the Blue Rhino propane tank model of swapping your battery out of your car, like at a Jiffy Lube style gas station, pull into a bay, they yank your battery out and put in a fresh one. You're in and out in 1 minute. There was a company called Better Place that raised $1 billion of venture funding in 2008 and 9, and they never generated a single dollar of revenue. So there were lots of failed attempts to how are we going to solve this issue? But to me, it all comes down to one very simple concept. For 100 years, we've been used to a pump model. You pull into a gas station, you get out, you pump fuel while you wait. 3 minutes later, you get back in your car and you leave. Now we have switched to a park model. When people complain to me, especially my own family members back east, electric vehicles, screw that, Mike. I'm never going to drive an electric vehicle. You can pry my Ford F-150 dually 50 pickup truck, keys out of my cold dead hand, blah, blah, blah. I'll never drive an electric car. okay. And why? It takes
Mhm.
too long to charge. And I'll say, okay, how long do you think it takes to charge? And they're like, I don't know. You drive a Tesla. How long does it take to charge? I said, it takes 15 seconds because that's the amount of time it takes for me to get out of my car, plug it in, and walk
Yeah.
away.
Right.
Walk into the store, walk into my house, walk into my office.
Yeah.
And then a half hour later, or maybe 4 hours later, I come back out. Now, I mean, I'm being rude if I leave it there for 4 hours, but
Right.
within less than an hour, the car's fully charged. And during that time, I'm not just sitting there. I can sit in the car and watch YouTube or whatever,
Mhm.
or play Candy Crush or answer work emails or whatever. But the bottom line is that paradigm shift from pump to park is, I think, what's gotten people messed up. And it reminds me of my poor sainted late mother when she saw me get my first cell phone in the early 90s, said, why would anybody want to carry a phone around with them? That makes no sense. We have a phone in the
Yeah.
kitchen and it has a
Yeah.
100-foot cord, so you can pretty much go anywhere you want with it. That was the mindset. That was
Yeah.
that's a paradigm shift, Jason. That is
Mhm.
the paradigm shift from a stationary phone to one you carry with you and is on you at all times, or a paradigm shift from I go to Blockbuster and pick out a DVD and rent it and I have to take it back the next day versus everything is available to me streaming 24 hours a day. It's either free with ads or I pay for it. All these paradigm shifts have happened in the last 10, 15, 20 years, just since the beginning of this century. And now we're still in the middle of a really massive one among transportation. And I think right now, as we've already identified, the biggest thing that we need to answer is who is going to service this massive fueling station network, right? Shell, Chevron, BP, they service their gas stations by they've got someone on staff, or they can roll a truck to come out and fix the pumps when something goes wrong. That level of maturity, we haven't reached it yet. And you know this, there's still not nearly enough commercial public charging points out there to support the massive amount of cars. So the demand for charging continues to increase and the infrastructure is actually not keeping pace.
Many markets, major metro markets that are underserved when you look at the available public charging stations as there are EVs. I look at my own state and its level of growth. When I got in the space, there was 30,000 EVs on Texas roads. Today, there's well over 200,000. But when you look at the amount of EV chargers that are needed, I mean, when the first round of NEVI funding hit our state, I live in Bexar County, the biggest county in the San Antonio region, and no one applied for those funding. No one.
Are you serious?
No, not in the first round of NEVI. No one applied.
Say that again. When you got into this, and that was 10 years ago, the industry was already well underway, but you went from 30,000 to you went up 15x, right? Or 20x, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Vehicles. But what do you think the infrastructure went up from? Doubled, maybe?
Yeah.
Tripled?
Not much.
It wasn't 15x.
Yeah, no, it sure wasn't. And even before NEVI, when VW money was hitting, Texas got a healthy allocation of VW funding. And there were operators applying for it, and then they would be approved, and then they still wouldn't take the money because they couldn't understand the ROI, or they couldn't understand the infrastructure complexities. Or it's kind of like the example you gave with your mom and landline versus cell phone. We're asking for a psychological shift when we talk about any type of technological change, and that's really what EV charging is. It's a technological shift and change in fueling. I mean, it's really just fueling with electrons, but like your example from your family and others that are kind of antagonists towards EV. It's like, well, how long does it take to charge? And every time I hear that, I just understand that is a question that is attached to an experience versus a true understanding. There's assumptions built in, and
you nailed it.
Once you've experienced it, you understand it's not that I have to charge. I'm charging, right. But my life I'm not standing there looking at the plug and watching the charger charge my vehicle like I am whenever I'm fueling a gasoline powered. I'm watching the pump and it's not the same thing. And so it's the shift, but yeah, the growth has been there, but there's also just been some, I don't know, even right now, you see so many places where we just kind of going flat in terms of growth. And I think it's because operators have sunk money into deployments that weren't successful. And then it's right. Like, well, they put the charger in where the power was available versus where there would be chargers utilized. And
Well, there's another challenge as well, Jason, which is we know that the car companies, the OEMs, at their core, inside of their heart of hearts, they don't want to sell EVs because they're expensive, which means their gross margin on the sale of the car is lower. And then secondarily, they lose almost all of that service revenue because EVs don't require, there's no oil changes, there's no filters to change. You know what I mean? Like, other than tires, windshield wipers, or wiper fluid, there's not really much you can do to service an electric vehicle. So that's really terrible for the car companies and the dealership groups that sell them. They rely on that service revenue. It's the same thing as the theater companies. You paying $15 a ticket to get into Mandalorian and Grogu doesn't make that Century Theater or AMC or whoever it is, doesn't make them a penny. They need you to buy that bucket of popcorn and that $11 Diet Coke. If you don't, then they don't make any money. So you bringing your own snacks from home to come and enjoy that movie in, the big screen, that's a disaster for them. And EVs are kind of that way for car companies. So that's why you hear all these stories about, well, such and such, GM, they had the first mover advantage with the Volt and the Bolt, and now they're pulling back. And the Lightning wasn't selling all that well for Ford, so they're pulling back. Tesla seems to be the only car company that has really figured it out. Rivian now is saying, we're not sure we're going to keep selling vehicles, but we're going to license our technology to Volvo and some of these other companies that need autonomy, need V to G, and that need, sort of basically the smart vehicle system. But they don't necessarily want to manufacture the car. And if you think about it, I've used a cell phone analogy with my mom and the 100-foot cord. Some companies decide that they're going to make the phone themselves, like Apple makes them, Samsung makes them, right? But Apple doesn't have the network. They don't make Verizon or T-Mobile. They let somebody else do that, right? So it allows the customer the freedom of choice. I want this model of phone. I like this network because it's strong in my area. And to me, that's the real key, is giving customers that freedom of choice. If you can say, hey, try out this network that you like for your charging stations, and then if you want to put this network on not only new stations that you're installing, but you want to repoint old stations. Shell Recharge has exited the space. A number of other companies have dropped out of the race. They've said, you know what, we're not going to continue. So you're starting to see we are in that chasm. There are folks, the attrition is starting. Back when mobile phones were beginning, my first cellular network wasn't Verizon like it is now. It was Cellular One, which doesn't exist anymore. There used to be 30 or 40 networks. McCaw Cellular, there was Uncle Goober and Sons cellular network, and maybe I made that one up. But the point is, now it's narrowed down. It's shaken out to the most solid remaining ones, which is T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. Then you get a couple of smaller ones, like there's Mint Mobile and Virgin, whatever. So the customer definitely has a choice. There can't just be one. There has to be a handful. And that's what's going to happen, I believe, between now and the end of this decade. You're going to see the network shake down to the core 3 to 5, 3 big ones and a couple of smaller ones. And then you're going to have a handful of probably 10 to a dozen hardware manufacturers, just like you do with cell phones. And then when you combine all them together, it gives more than enough choice. Because as you know, if there's hundreds and hundreds of choices, then it's overwhelming, and you don't even know how to narrow the list down, right?
Yeah, that's right. I
so
agree.
That happens naturally. That selection is now underway, and it's happening naturally. Survival of the fittest.
Absolutely. On the other side of the coin of the power of choice is the complexities of trying to be all, do all, be all things to all people. The complexities that are attached to that. I experienced it firsthand whenever I was pulled over to Rivian. I went over to Rivian. I saw stars. I saw rocket ship. I saw this is the next Tesla, and I went over there and left a good stable job and took a pay cut and went to Rivian, and the business unit I was attached to doesn't exist anymore. It didn't last. And it was because, we look at Tesla, their core product was the vehicle, and they built the network to support the core product.
At a loss.
Yeah, at a loss, at a loss. And then, Rivian was standing up a network because they were bringing the truck and the SUV into the market. But then we had a mission: go put 10,000 level 2 chargers out in the wild, and that brand alignment will help move the vehicles along forward. And it wasn't a model that was designed to work ultimately, and that's why it didn't work, and it shuttered. Of course, the Rivian Waypoint network is still alive and still deploying, and that's successful. But on the L2 side of things, it didn't work out. And so going back to the power of choice, and the other side of that coin being the complexity of trying to be all things to all people, and the pursuit of vertical integration. It's like, find what you do well and do that well. Don't try to do everything mediocre and one thing well, because you're going to start losing money on the one thing you do well. The one thing you do well.
It's the difference between Cheesecake Factory and In-N-Out Burger, right? Cheesecake Factory, you can get chow mein, you can get chicken parmesan, you can get dumplings, you can get pho, you can get, falafels. Yeah. How do you do all that well?
Yeah.
In-N-Out Burger says, we'll give you cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. That's it. You want a salad, chicken nuggets? We don't do that. We pick one thing, we pick a lane, and we are the best at it, right? So I do think that there is that existential dilemma right now for a lot of companies of, who are we, and can we survive being that? And if we cannot, then what do we pivot to? For example, AmpUp's original vision was they wanted to be Verbo for EV charging stations. So we've got hundreds of thousands of home chargers that are completely unused and unoccupied during the day. So what if we let people turn those into revenue producing opportunities? Let somebody come and use your charging station, kind of, instead of let somebody come and sleep in your vacation home. It's let somebody plug in your garage. There was a little problem with that, which is, who wants to let a total stranger come and park in their garage while they're gone? It's why we lock our doors. It's why we close our garage doors. So our founder quickly learned that was not something that was going to work, and he pivoted to where we are today, which is, let's be the most flexible CMS platform that does the most, and let's integrate with all of the awesome hardware partners that don't make their own software platform. And it's been incredibly successful for us, and things are taking off now in ways that I really couldn't even have anticipated when I joined the company 2 years ago.
Well, Mike, I'm looking at the timer, and we are almost at 51 minutes. It's fascinating. This is going to have to be conversation one of, I don't know, 2, 3, I don't know. We're going to have you back, because I feel like we've just scratched the surface in the conversation that could be had between us. So I really appreciate you coming on, but I'd like, I still got to cover some more bases here. But one of the things I'd like, just because you've been in the space so long, I would like to, get some prediction out of you, maybe looking out over the next 5 years. Where is the EV industry going? You can answer that from the charging standpoint, software, hardware, vehicles. What's the next horizon that we should be aiming towards, or that we're going to face just by virtue of progress?
Yeah. We've talked about it a little bit. I think one of the main things that you're going to see is attrition.
Yes.
Fewer companies at the end of this decade than we have today. And some people might say that that's a sign or proof that the industry is shrinking. No, that's proof that the industry is consolidating or attriting down to the most stable and the most fit players that remain, right? The folks that actually have the acuity and the ability to execute and to provide all three of those things that we've talked about, Jason. Great hardware, flexible software, and responsive O&M. Those are the three pillars of successful EV charging infrastructure. If you can help in one of those three ways, or all three, or two of the three, then you are going to be successful. So I do think that in the next 5 years, from now until the end of the decade, you will see a lot of attrition. And when you saw companies like EV Box drop out of the game, and Juicebox, and Shell, and EvoCharge, they all just decided to get out of this space. We're going to see a lot more of that. There are a lot of CMS platforms today that are going to drop out of the race, and someone's going to have to pick up those abandoned assets so that drivers don't feel stranded, or that site hosts who invested money don't feel stranded. So there's going to be a lot of that, but I think the biggest thing that's going to change between now and the end of the decade, or in the next 10 years, is that the service aspect of how do we keep this massively expanding ecosystem and footprint of charging stations up and running, not just uptime, but charging success rate, right? We talked about that earlier in this session as well. So I do think that the industry faces a fresh set of challenges, and then couple all of that with kind of a rising sentiment of negativity or pessimism about even the survivability of this industry. Will it survive? I have customers ask me that every day. Hey, if I prepay you for a 5-year contract with you, what's the financial viability of the company? Now, fortunately, that's not a hard thing to convince them that we are going to be viable. We are going to be around. Not every company will, but here's why we are not going anywhere, right? But that level of pessimism is driven a lot by the media, who are saying things like EVs, they were the failed experiment. It's the hula hoop, the skateboard. It was a fad. It was a craze. It came and went, and now it's dying. Well, you and I don't believe that, right? I think that that is reactionary, and I think it's productive to suggest that the market has spoken. When you have to pay $7.49 for a gallon of gas like I do here in Northern California, EVs are more viable than they've ever been. And you know this, Jason, because when you got into this space 10 years ago, gas was $4 a gallon, and that was an all-time high. It had never hit prices that high. And all of a sudden, people didn't want big gas-guzzling SUVs anymore. They started running to the Tesla, the Leaf, the Volt, something so that they didn't have to pay that $4 a gallon gas. Gas prices have almost doubled since then, and they don't look like they're going down anytime soon. So my simple question to the doubters out there is this: you really think that going zero emission and paying a fuel that's 1/10 the cost of gasoline or 1/20th the cost of gasoline is something that's going to go away? I know that the OEMs don't love it, because they don't get that service revenue. But the market speaks. We speak with our wallets. And now, I mean, it used to be 10 years ago, there were 4, 5, or 6 models of electric vehicle you could choose from. How many are there now? I stopped counting at 100. It's over 100, right?
Yes.
So the number is massively growing. The choices are growing. And so our job, I think, Jason, and I agree with you, I think this is hopefully our first conversation of many, because there's definitely room for a part 2 here. We don't, but with somebody like me, you don't need to ask me many questions. I just, I speak as a good friend of mine, Jason Smith, once said, Mike, you speak in complete paragraphs. And I said,
I know Jason.
Thank you, question mark. I'm not sure that I'll say thank you, but I'm not sure that was actually meant as a compliment. But in any event, I do think it's exciting times for us, Jason, and I'm myself not going anywhere. I took as I think I said to you during our pre-interview, I'm now 18 years into a career that ended up completely by accident. I didn't seek it out. I didn't think EVs were the next big thing. But as an old aphorism said, sometimes the best part of your vacation is a wrong turn that you take. And I took a wrong turn into the EV industry in 2008. Basically been here ever since. And I didn't choose it. It chose me, and I'm really grateful.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And, just to put the cap on what you were responding to in terms of, future outlook and what happens and the attrition and the consolidation, we don't even have to look that far. You cited 2 examples of the cell phone networks and the consolidation there, the 3 there. You talked about, and we've talked about, petroleum retail fueling. There's basically 2 manufacturers of gas pumps today here in the U.S. It's Gilbarco and Wayne. No one knows who Schlumberger is. No one knows who Tokheim is. No one knows. And typically the consumer doesn't really know. It's a little different in EV charging.
And they don't care, do they? It's just care. A dispenser. No one's going to say, well, I only use Gilbarco pumps.
Right. Yeah, they don't even see that. They see the brand of fuel, or they see the retailer's brand on that pump, and that's how they.
Or they see the price, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I don't think there's that much difference between the fuels that are in the tanks underground, but some of them will say, hey, we've added this cleanser in ours. We've got Techron, or we've got this or that. They do a really good job of trying to differentiate something that really is not different at all. And we've kind of gotten to that space in the EV charging market that the CMS platforms now have all become sort of commoditized, and you need to differentiate yourself in other ways, like hiding complexity, a single pane of glass that works on all hardware, or we provide O&M and session success rates that are better than anybody else. Those are the differentiating factors in today's EV infrastructure world.
Well said. For those listening that want to connect with you, Mike, what's the best way? They want to learn about AmpUp. They want to connect with you directly. What's the best way?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just search Mike DiNucci, or you can send me an email to mike@ampup.io. Check out our website, ampup.io. You can learn all about what we do, how cool our software is. Or if you want to just give me a call, send me a quick email to mike@ampup.io, and I'll respond back to you and talk your ear off like I just did to Jason.
Thank you, Mike, for coming on Field Frequency, and we look forward to having you back.
I'm thrilled with the invitation. Thank you so much for giving me the chance, Jason. I appreciate you.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, AUTOZY.co.